It started with an innocent birthday present. My younger sister, Lily, turned 8 that day, and our grandmother, who had always been fond of old, eerie antiques, gave her a doll. But this wasn't just any doll. It was old, its porcelain face cracked slightly, with glassy blue eyes that seemed far too real. The dress was made of delicate lace, stained yellow with age, and its tiny lips were curved into a smile that never seemed to fade. Lily was fascinated. The moment she unwrapped the doll, she held it close and beamed at Grandma. "What's her name?" she asked. Grandma hesitated for just a second. "Annabelle," she finally said, though something in her voice didn't sound quite right. "She's been in our family for a long time." I didn't like the way Grandma looked at the doll, almost as if she regretted giving it to Lily. And later that night, as I helped my sister place the doll on a shelf in her bedroom, I felt its cold glass eyes staring at me. Something about Annabelle felt wrong. The first sign. That very night, I woke up to the sound of whispering. It was faint, so quiet I thought I might have imagined it. But when I turned in bed, I realized the sound wasn't coming from outside. It was inside our house, inside Lily's room. The door was slightly open, and dim moonlight spilled into the hallway. Slowly, I got up, my heart pounding against my ribs. I tiptoed towards her door, holding my breath as I peeked inside. Lily was asleep, tucked beneath her blanket, but the whispering continued. And then, my stomach twisted. The doll wasn't on the shelf anymore. It was on the floor, facing Lily's bed. For a long moment, I just stood there, frozen. I wanted to believe she had dropped it before going to sleep, but I knew she hadn't. I had placed it neatly on the shelf myself. Swallowing the lump in my throat, I stepped into the room, picked up the doll, and placed it back. My hands trembled as I adjusted its dress. The second I let go, a strange chill crawled up my arms. I didn't sleep well that night. A growing unease. The next morning, Lily was more attached to the doll than ever. She carried Annabelle everywhere, setting her beside her at breakfast, taking her outside to play, and even whispering to her when she thought no one was watching. At first, I thought it was just her imagination. Kids do that. But then things got stranger. "Lily, who are you talking to?" I asked one afternoon as she sat on the floor of her room, staring into the doll's unblinking eyes. She giggled, hugging the doll close. "Annabelle talks to me." I frowned. "What does she say?" Lily hesitated, then lowered her voice. "She says she likes me, but she doesn't like you." My blood ran cold. I tried to brush it off as some weird game, but after that, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. Then, one night, I saw something that made my skin crawl. Something is watching. It was past midnight when I woke up again, this time with an overwhelming feeling of being watched. My room was dark, except for a sliver of light from the hallway. I turned onto my side, forcing myself to close my eyes. And then, just as I started drifting back to sleep, tap. A soft, deliberate tapping. My breath hitched. It was coming from the hallway. Slowly, I turned my head toward the door. The tapping continued, rhythmic and slow, like tiny fingers drumming against the wood. My stomach clenched as I reached for my phone, turning on the flashlight. The second the beam illuminated the hallway, the tapping stopped. And standing right outside my room, placed carefully in the center of the hallway, was Annabelle, facing my door. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation, but deep down, I knew. I knew I had placed that doll in Lily's room before we went to bed. I picked it up, hands shaking, and stormed into Lily's room. She was still asleep, curled up beneath her blankets, unaware of the growing nightmare unfolding around us. As quietly as I could, I set Annabelle down on the shelf and left the room, shutting the door firmly behind me. I didn't sleep at all that night. A warning from Grandma. The next morning, I told Grandma about what had happened. Her face went pale. "You moved the doll?" she asked in a hushed voice. I frowned. "Yeah." "Why?" Grandma exhaled sharply, rubbing her temples. "I should have never given it to her." "What do you mean?" My voice was shaking now. She looked at me, eyes dark with something that almost looked like guilt. "Annabelle doesn't like being moved." The air in the room felt suffocating. "What are you saying?" Grandma hesitated, then finally spoke the words that sent chills down my spine. She moves on her own. Want to know what happens next? Trust me, it only gets more terrifying from here. Make sure to subscribe to Lore Shadows so you don't miss the next part, because some dolls should never be played with. Are you brave enough to continue? That night, I couldn't sleep. Grandma's words echoed in my head. She moves on her own. No matter how much I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, something in my gut told me otherwise. I lay in bed, staring at my ceiling, listening for any sound, any sign that the doll had moved again. The house was silent. Too silent. I glanced at my phone. 2:57 a.m. I exhaled shakily and turned on my side, forcing my eyes shut. I just needed sleep. That was all. Sleep would make everything feel normal again. Then I heard it. A whisper. Soft. Barely audible. But it was coming from inside the house. My body stiffened as I strained to listen. The voice was too faint to make out the words, but I could tell one thing for sure. It was coming from Lily's room. A cold shiver crawled down my spine. I turned onto my back, staring at my ceiling. Maybe Lily was just talking in her sleep. Maybe she had woken up and was playing with Annabelle. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. The whispering continued. And then I heard something worse. Lily's voice. She wasn't whispering. She wasn't talking. She was whimpering. Something's wrong with Lily. I threw my blanket off and rushed to her room, heart pounding. Her door was slightly open, just enough for me to peek inside. And what I saw made my breath catch in my throat. Lily was curled up in bed, gripping her blanket so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she shook her head, muttering, "No, no, no," over and over again. And Annabelle. Annabelle was sitting right beside her on the bed. Not on the shelf. Not on the floor. On the bed. Facing Lily. I pushed the door open, my voice trembling. "Lily." She flinched and turned to look at me, her wide, teary eyes filled with terror. "Take it away," she whispered. "Make it stop." My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. "What happened?" Lily shook her head rapidly. "She talks to me. She won't stop talking." I felt ice settle in my veins. "Lily, are you sure? Are you just dreaming?" She swallowed hard, her breathing uneven. "No." I woke up, and she was already there. She said she wants to play. She said she wants to stay with me forever. A lump formed in my throat. I couldn't do this. I couldn't listen to my 8-year-old sister tell me a doll was whispering to her in the dead of night. And yet, I had heard something too. I reached for Annabelle, determined to get rid of her once and for all. But the moment my fingers touched her cold porcelain skin, a sharp ringing filled my ears. A sound so high-pitched, so unnatural, that I recoiled instantly, clutching my head. The whispering, no, the voice, slithered through my ears like an echo from another world. "Don't touch me." I gasped and stumbled backward, my hands shaking. Lily whimpered under her blanket, and I knew I had to do something. I couldn't leave the doll there. Not after this. Ignoring the ringing in my ears, I grabbed Annabelle, yanking her off the bed. My fingers trembled as I carried her out of the room, down the stairs, and into the living room. I didn't know where to put her. I didn't want to throw her away, not yet. Something told me it wasn't that simple. So I placed her inside an old wooden cabinet, slammed the door shut, and locked it. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. For now. The whisper that follows. I returned to Lily's room, sitting beside her on the bed. "She's gone," I whispered, brushing her hair from her face. "She can't bother you anymore." Lily sniffled. "She's mad at you." I stiffened. "What?" She turned her teary eyes toward me. "You shouldn't have locked her up." I forced a shaky smile. "She's just a doll, Lily." But even as I said it, my voice faltered. I turned off her lamp, kissed her forehead, and left the room, trying to shake the unease settling deep in my chest. I returned to my own bed, exhaling heavily. Everything was fine now. Lily was safe. And then, a whisper, directly in my ear. "You shouldn't have done that. The doll moves on its own." I couldn't move. The whisper had been so close, as if someone had leaned in right beside me and spoken directly into my ear. My body froze in terror, my mind screaming at me to run, to get up, turn on the lights, and check if I was alone. But I wasn't alone. I could feel it. My breaths came out shaky as I clenched my blanket, trying to convince myself that I had imagined it, that my exhaustion was making me hear things. And then, from the hallway, thump. A dull, heavy sound. I bolted upright, my heart hammering. The sound had come from downstairs, from the living room, where I had locked the doll away. The air in my room felt thick, suffocating. My body screamed at me to stay put, but my curiosity, or maybe my stupidity, got the best of me. I reached for my phone, the glow of the screen barely illuminating the darkness. 3:12 a.m. I inhaled sharply and swung my legs over the bed, my feet touching the cold wooden floor. Step by step, I crept toward my door, pushing it open just enough to peer into the hallway. Nothing. The house was silent again. But that silence was worse than any sound. I held my breath as I moved down the hallway, my heart pounding so loudly that I swore it would wake everyone up. When I reached the top of the stairs, I hesitated. From where I stood, I could see part of the living room. The cabinet was still closed, still locked, but something felt wrong. The air was heavier, thicker, like something was waiting for me. I forced myself to keep going, step by step, down the staircase. The house creaked beneath my weight, each sound echoing in the stillness of the night. When I reached the cabinet, I hesitated again. Nothing looked out of place. The lock was still there. The doors were still shut. But then, why did it feel like something was watching me? My fingers trembled as I reached for the lock, gripping the cold metal. I pulled. It didn't budge. Relief washed over me for a brief second. Maybe I had just imagined everything. Maybe the stress was getting to me. Then I turned around, and my stomach dropped. Annabelle was sitting on the couch. It's impossible. Right. I stumbled backward, my breath caught in my throat. My mind scrambled for an explanation. Had someone moved her? Had I forgotten to lock the cabinet? No, that wasn't possible. I had locked it. And yet, there she was, sitting upright, her cracked porcelain face tilted slightly, her glassy blue eyes staring straight at me. I swallowed hard, my hands shaking. I had two choices: leave her there and pretend I never saw anything, or move her back and convince myself that I was losing my mind. I didn't want to touch her. Every instinct in my body screamed at me not to. But I had to. Slowly, I reached for the doll, my fingers barely brushing against the fabric of her dress. Cold. So cold. I snatched my hand back, my breath shaky. This wasn't normal. Dolls weren't supposed to feel like that, like something lifeless and frozen. I had to get rid of her. Without thinking, I grabbed Annabelle by the arm and stormed toward the front door. My mind raced with 1,000 thoughts, but one thing was clear: she couldn't stay in this house. My fingers fumbled with the lock as I yanked the door open. The cold night air hit me like a wave, but I didn't care. I stepped outside, gripping the doll tightly. And then, laughter. Soft. Childlike. Right behind me. I spun around so fast that I nearly lost my balance. But there was no one there. Just the open doorway. Just the darkened hallway leading back inside. I turned my gaze to the doll in my hands. She was still. Silent. But I knew she had been the one laughing. My breathing grew erratic. I needed to get rid of her now. Without wasting another second, I ran to the garbage bin on the side of the house, lifted the lid, and threw her inside. I slammed it shut. It was over. Or at least I thought it was. She's back. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I barely slept, my body too tense, my thoughts racing. When morning came, I convinced myself that it had all been in my head. When Lily woke up, she didn't ask about Annabelle. In fact, she didn't mention the doll at all. Maybe she was relieved. Maybe somehow she understood that the doll was gone. For the first time in days, I felt okay. Until I went downstairs. Until I saw what was waiting for me in the kitchen. My blood turned to ice. Annabelle, sitting at the kitchen table, propped up perfectly in one of the chairs. as if she had been waiting for me. I couldn't breathe. My body refused to move. This was impossible. I had thrown her away. I had gotten rid of her. And yet, here she was. I swallowed hard, my hands trembling at my sides. This wasn't my imagination. This wasn't stress. She was real. And she wasn't going anywhere. I backed away slowly, my heart hammering so loudly that it drowned out every other sound. Then, just as I turned to leave the kitchen, the chair scraped against the floor. A slow, deliberate movement. I froze. My entire body locked in place as a cold dread settled deep in my chest. Then, in the silence, a whisper. "You can't get rid of me." I didn't know how long I stood there, staring at the dolls sitting at the kitchen table. My mind screamed at me to run, to leave the house, to get as far away from Annabelle as possible. But I couldn't move. My breath hitched in my throat as I watched the chair she sat in shift slightly, the soft scraping sound of wood against tile filling the silent kitchen. It was subtle, almost like she was adjusting her position, like she was settling in. Then, just as I took a shaky step back, thump, a sudden, heavy knock against the front door. The sound was so loud, so unexpected, that I nearly jumped out of my skin. My pulse skyrocketed as I spun around, my eyes darting to the door. Who would be here this early? Another knock. I hesitated. My entire body screamed at me not to open it. But standing here, alone in the kitchen with Annabelle watching me, felt far worse. I took a deep breath and approached the door, my fingers trembling as I unlocked it. As soon as I pulled it open, my heart stopped. An old woman stood on the porch. Her wrinkled face was creased with worry, her sharp eyes darting over my shoulder, scanning the inside of my house. Her silver hair was pulled back into a loose bun, and she clutched a small leather pouch in her hands. She looked terrified. Her gaze finally settled on me, and her expression darkened. "You still have it," she whispered. A chill ran down my spine. "What?" She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "The doll. You still have it." My throat went dry. "How do you know about that?" The woman took a step closer, lowering her voice. "Because I was the last person to own it." The doll's horrifying past. I didn't want to let her in. I wanted to slam the door shut and pretend this wasn't happening. But something in her face, something in the way she looked at me, so filled with dread, made me step aside. She walked in cautiously, her hands gripping the leather pouch as though it was the only thing keeping her together. When she saw Annabelle sitting at the kitchen table, she inhaled sharply. "You need to listen to me," she said, turning to face me. "That thing isn't a toy. It isn't just a doll. It's a vessel." I swallowed hard. A vessel for what? Her lips pressed into a thin line, something that should never have been let out. My body went rigid. She gestured for me to sit down, and despite my instincts telling me to get out of the house, I obeyed. "It started with my granddaughter," she began, her voice shaky. "She was around the same age as your little sister. I bought that doll for her birthday, thinking it was just a beautiful antique." She hesitated, as if the memory was too painful to relive. Then she continued. "At first, it was small things. She would tell me that Annabelle moved on her own, that she would wake up in different places than where she left her. I didn't believe her. I thought she was just playing games." I clenched my hands into fists. I knew exactly what she meant. Then she started hearing the whispers, the woman said, her voice barely above a whisper itself. Voices at night, calling her name, talking to her. My stomach churned. "One night, I woke up to her screaming," she continued. "I rushed to her room, and she was sitting in the corner, rocking back and forth, crying. I asked her what was wrong, and she pointed to the doll. I didn't want to hear what came next. She said Annabelle told her a secret." A heavy silence filled the room. I swallowed. "What kind of secret?" The woman's face paled. "She told her when she was going to die." I felt the air get knocked out of my lungs. 2 weeks later, she drowned. I stared at her, my skin crawling. You think the doll?" The woman's eyes glistened with grief. "I know it did. And I know that once it attaches itself to someone, it doesn't let go." A chill swept through me, and I turned to look at Annabelle. She was still sitting there, completely still, her porcelain face emotionless. But I knew she was listening. The doll's purpose. The old woman reached into the leather pouch and pulled out a handful of something dark and powdery. Salt, she explained, sprinkling some around the doll. It won't stop her, but it'll weaken her, at least for now. I couldn't breathe. This was too much. It was too insane. What does she want? I whispered. The woman shook her head. I don't know. No one does. But she feeds off fear. The more afraid you are, the stronger she gets. I thought back to last night, to how the whispers grew louder the more terrified I became. She likes to play, the woman continued. But it's not a game you want to be part of. I gritted my teeth. Then how do I stop her? The woman exhaled slowly, her expression grim. You don't. My blood turned to ice. She won't stop, she said. You can try to throw her away. You can try to burn her. But she'll always find her way back. I shook my head. That's not possible. There has to be a way. The woman hesitated, then leaned in. There is one thing you can do. I held my breath. Pass her on. A shudder ran through me. What? Her gaze was unreadable. She only latches onto one family at a time. If you give her to someone else, willingly, she'll leave. I recoiled. You're saying I have to curse someone else? She didn't respond. I clenched my jaw. That's how you got rid of her, isn't it? You gave her away. The woman closed her eyes. I had no choice. I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. That's not an option. The woman sighed. Then you'd better prepare yourself. Because if you don't get rid of her, she's going to take someone from you. My stomach twisted. I thought of Lily. I couldn't let that happen. The woman reached into her pouch again, pulling out a small, rusted locket. This belonged to the first girl who owned the doll. She never made it past her 10th birthday. I swallowed hard. She's older now, isn't she? The woman said. It took me a second to realize what she meant. My heart nearly stopped. Lily. Locked doors and unseen eyes. The air inside the house felt heavier than before, as if the very walls had absorbed the weight of the old woman's words. The idea that Annabelle wouldn't leave unless I passed her to someone else made my stomach turn. There had to be another way. The woman left soon after, leaving behind the pouch of salt and the rusted locket. Before she stepped out onto the porch, she looked at me one last time. Whatever you do, don't let her see you afraid. Then she was gone. I locked the door behind her, making sure the deadbolt was in place, but I knew deep down that a locked door wouldn't keep out whatever was inside that doll. I turned back toward the kitchen. Annabelle was still there, sitting at the table, watching. I forced myself to look away. My pulse pounded in my ears as I grabbed the salt and started pouring a thick, uneven line across every doorway in the house. If it couldn't stop her, at least it might slow her down. By the time I finished, night had fallen, and the house felt even more suffocating than before. I hesitated before turning off the lights, a nagging sense of paranoia creeping into my bones. Then I realized something. The house was too quiet. Even at night, there was always some noise. The hum of the fridge, the distant sound of cars, the wind against the windows. But now, nothing. I swallowed hard and made my way upstairs, forcing myself to ignore the creeping sensation crawling up my spine. My breath came shallow as I reached my bedroom door. The moment I stepped inside, I locked it behind me. I wasn't taking any chances. The feeling of being watched. I collapsed onto my bed, exhaustion finally catching up with me. My mind raced with everything the old woman had told me. The doll had been passed from person to person for years. She fed on fear. She whispered secrets. And worst of all, she didn't let go unless you forced her onto someone else. I refused to do that. I wasn't going to curse another person. I'd find another way. I closed my eyes, trying to push the thoughts away. But just as sleep was beginning to take me, a soft noise made my entire body freeze. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up, heart hammering. It was coming from the hallway. A slow, deliberate tapping sound, like fingers drumming against the wooden floor. I held my breath. Tap, tap, tap. It stopped. Silence. I didn't dare move. Then, creak. My bedroom door handle twisted. The lock clicked. I lurched forward, gripping the knob before it could turn all the way. My fingers clenched around it, so tightly my knuckles turned white. My heart slammed against my ribs as I pressed my ear to the door. Nothing. Just silence. I stood there, frozen, until my breathing steadied. I had locked the door. Nothing could have gotten in. I was just tired. My mind was playing tricks on me. At least, that's what I told myself. I slowly backed away from the door, forcing a shaky breath through my lips. Go to sleep. Just go to sleep. I climbed back into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin. I needed to rest. I needed to clear my head. But just as my eyelids grew heavy, my stomach twisted into a knot. The closet door was open. I never left my closet door open. And worse? Something was inside. The closet that should have stayed closed. A shape sat in the shadows, small and unmoving. My breath hitched as I reached for my phone, my trembling fingers barely able to unlock the screen. I turned on the flashlight. The beam landed on Annabelle. She was sitting inside my closet. I hadn't put her there. I couldn't breathe. My skin burned with the need to run, to scream, to do anything but sit here frozen. But then, her head moved. Her porcelain face tilted. And then, the closet door slammed shut. I scrambled backward, pressing myself against the headboard. My pulse roared in my ears as I stared at the closed door, my hands gripping the blanket so tightly my fingers ached. Then came the whisper. Soft. Right against my ear. Let me out. I didn't think. I lunged for the light switch, flooding the room with brightness. My chest rose and fell in sharp gasps as I turned toward the closet. It was still closed. The whisper was gone. But I knew the truth now. I wasn't just being haunted. Annabelle wasn't just watching. She was playing. And she was getting closer. A new kind of fear. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in bed, knees drawn to my chest, waiting for the next whisper, the next sound, the next sign that I wasn't alone. The house stayed eerily silent. But that was almost worse. By the time morning arrived, my mind was made up. I was going to get rid of her. Not by giving her away. Not by passing her curse to someone else. I was going to end this. Even if it meant breaking every rule. Even if it meant facing whatever horror lived inside that doll. I didn't care. I was done playing her game. Morning brought little relief. The sunlight that streamed through my bedroom window felt thin, weak, false. As if the house itself refused to let go of the nightmare from the night before. Annabelle remained inside the closet, untouched. But I knew she had moved. I knew she had whispered in the dark. And worst of all, she knew things. I could still hear her voice, soft and breathy, curling against my ear like a secret only meant for me. Let me out. The way she spoke wasn't just some random phrase. It was directed at me. She wanted something. And I was starting to fear that she would do anything to get it. The first whisper in daylight. I forced myself out of bed, every muscle in my body tense with exhaustion. I needed to get rid of the doll. Today. No more waiting. I avoided looking at the closet as I got dressed, but the weight of Annabelle's presence still pressed against me. She was aware. Watching. Waiting. I swallowed back the unease and grabbed the salt from my desk, clutching it in my shaking hands as I stepped toward the closet. One deep breath. Then I reached for the handle. I yanked it open. Annabelle sat exactly where I had seen her last. Her glassy eyes stared ahead, her tiny porcelain hands resting in her lap, motionless. Too still. Too perfect. Like she was waiting for me to look away. I forced myself to move. I dumped the salt onto her, letting the grains cover her dress, her hands, her face. The old woman had told me it would help, it had to. But as the last grain fell, I heard it. A giggle. A child's soft, cruel giggle. Coming from the doll. My heart slammed into my ribs. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the salt. And then, in a voice that wasn't mine, "You can't hide from what you've done." I froze. The room tilted. My breath turned to ice in my lungs. What I had done. What was she talking about? She knows things I've never told anyone. I grabbed the closet door and slammed it shut. I didn't want to see her. I didn't want to hear her. But the damage had already been done. I knew what she was doing now. She wasn't just whispering random words in the dark. She was whispering my secrets. Things I had never spoken out loud. Things that had been buried deep in my mind, locked away, forgotten. And now she knew them. I stumbled backward, my hands gripping my head as I tried to steady my breathing. It had to be a trick. It had to be. But then, you lied to her. My blood ran cold. You told her you'd always be there. I didn't want to hear this. I didn't want to remember. But the doll kept whispering. You weren't. I grabbed my ears, squeezing my eyes shut. No, no, no. It wasn't real. It was just a doll. Just a stupid, broken doll. But it was too late. The memory clawed its way back. A memory I never wanted to relive. I saw the image in my mind before I could stop it. A hospital room. The smell of antiseptic. The sound of a heart monitor beeping. Too slow. Her hand in mine, cold, fragile. And my voice so sure, so full of hope, whispering, I'll always be here. But I wasn't. I had left. I had stepped out for just a moment, just long enough to clear my head. And when I came back, she was gone. I sucked in a sharp breath, my chest tightening as the weight of that memory crushed me all over again. How did the doll know? How did she know about her? I had never spoken about it. Not once. Not to anyone. Yet Annabelle knew. And now she wouldn't let me forget. The shadows start moving. I backed away from the closet, my pulse hammering in my throat. I had to get out of here. I turned toward the door and stopped. The shadow in the hallway wasn't mine. It stretched across the floor, long and unnatural, bending at angles that made no sense. It moved. It moved even though nothing was there. The air grew heavy, thick with something unseen. My vision blurred at the edges, my stomach twisting as I realized. I wasn't alone in the house anymore. I wasn't just being haunted by Annabelle. Something else had come with her. And it was waiting. Watching. I can't stay here. I ran. I didn't stop to look behind me. I didn't want to see what was following me. I grabbed my keys and bolted for the front door, my heartbeat nearly deafening. My fingers fumbled at the lock. It felt stiff, wrong, like something was holding it in place. I twisted harder. It wouldn't move. I yanked. I pulled. Nothing. A breath touched the back of my neck. Cold. Not human. And then, in a voice that sent every nerve in my body into pure terror, you can't leave me behind. My stomach twisted. I turned my head just slightly, and I saw it. A glimpse of something in the corner of my eye. Something tall. Twisted. Wrong. Something that wasn't Annabelle. I let out a strangled gasp, slamming my shoulder into the door. It burst open. I fell forward onto the porch, scrambling against the wooden boards as I twisted to look back. The hallway was empty. The shadow was gone. But I knew it was still there. I knew it was still watching. And I knew one more thing. This wasn't just a haunted doll. This was something else. Something ancient. Something far, far worse. And I had let it in. The house was no longer mine. I stood on the front porch, breath ragged, staring into the darkened hallway where Annabelle sat behind the closet door. She wasn't alone anymore. Something else had come with her. And it was waiting. I had felt it when I tried to leave. The whisper on my neck, the weight in the air. Something unnatural. Something that had been hiding in the corners of my vision. I should have run. I should have left and never looked back. But I didn't. Because deep down I knew. It wouldn't let me go. A house that breathes. The silence inside the house wasn't real silence. It had a weight to it. A pressure that pressed against my skin, wormed into my skull. I stepped forward, feeling the wood creak beneath my feet. The door swung shut behind me. I barely suppressed a shudder. I had one goal. Get the doll and burn it. Destroy it. And whatever this was before it went any further. But as I turned toward the hallway, my stomach twisted. Something was wrong. The air smelled different. Like damp earth and decay. The hallway looked different. It was darker, too dark. The light bulbs above flickered weakly, struggling against a thickening shadow that stretched across the walls. And then, something moved. A shape, long and thin, crawling from beneath the closet door. I froze. It wasn't a shadow cast by anything. It was moving on its own. Like a living thing, it twisted and stretched, spilling out into the hallway, dragging itself toward me. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but my body refused to move. And then, a voice. "You should never have ignored me." It came from the closet. From the doll. The whispering horror. I took a step back, but the shadows reacted. They lunged. Not fast, slow. Deliberate. Like they were savoring the moment, relishing my fear. My breath hitched as the tendrils stretched toward my feet, curling like fingers reaching. I stumbled backward, barely escaping as I turned and ran. The living room felt smaller than before, the walls pressing in. I grabbed my bag, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the strap. I had to get out. I had to. Thump. A heavy dragging sound came from the hallway. I turned slowly. The closet door was open. Annabelle was gone. It's getting closer. The darkness pulsed, twisting in ways my mind couldn't fully comprehend. It wasn't just a shadow. It was alive. It was hunting me. And the doll. I didn't want to think about where she had gone. I clutched my car keys and bolted for the door. But as I reached it, my body seized. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick with something unseen, something wrapping around my limbs, pressing against my chest like unseen hands. And then, in a voice too close, too real, "You think you can leave me behind?" I was yanked backward, dragged into the dark. The force slammed me into the floor, pain shooting through my ribs. My hands scrambled against the wood, trying to push myself up, but the shadow held me down. And then I saw it. The doll. She sat in the doorway, her head tilted slightly, her glass eyes gleaming in the dim light. But she wasn't alone. The shadow, the thing that had been hiding inside her, was emerging. Long, thin fingers stretched from the darkness, pulling free from her porcelain body, twisting unnaturally as they crawled toward me. It was leaving the doll. It wanted me instead. Panic surged through me. My body fought against the invisible weight pinning me down. I had to move. I had to run. I sucked in a breath, forcing all my strength into my limbs. And then, with one desperate shove, I broke free. A deadly realization. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering, and lunged for the fireplace. The poker. My fingers closed around the iron handle, gripping it so tightly my knuckles went white. I turned. The shadow had almost fully emerged. Its arms were stretched long, its body still halfway inside Annabelle, but its face. Oh God. It had no features. Just a hollow, endless void where a face should be. But I felt it staring at me. I had to act now. I gritted my teeth, raised the poker, and swung. The metal collided with Annabelle. A horrible, inhuman shriek ripped through the air. The shadow recoiled, jerking violently as if in pain. I swung again. And again. The doll shattered. Porcelain shards flew across the floor. The shadow screamed. It wasn't dying, but it was angry. And as it recoiled into the darkness, its final words sent ice through my veins. "You can't destroy what you set free. The horror isn't over." The room fell silent. The house felt different. Like the weight had lifted. Like the presence had retreated. But I knew the truth. I hadn't destroyed it. I had only released it. And now, it was out there. Somewhere. Waiting. Watching. And it wasn't finished with me yet. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers ached. The house loomed in the rearview mirror, a dark silhouette against the moonlit sky. I should have driven away the moment I got inside. I should have left that cursed place behind and never looked back. But I couldn't. Because the truth was worse than I had imagined. Destroying the doll hadn't saved me. It had only made things worse. Something follows me. The streets were empty as I finally forced myself to drive. The headlights carved a path through the dark, but it felt like the night was pressing in. I checked the mirror. Nothing. But I felt it. That same weight, that same unnatural presence that had filled my home. It clung to me, settled in my chest like a sickness that wouldn't leave. I turned onto the main road, my eyes darting to the mirror again. And then I saw it. A shape, standing beneath a flickering streetlight. Tall, unmoving, watching me. My foot slammed the gas pedal. The car surged forward, the shape vanishing in the distance. I told myself it was my imagination, that my mind was playing tricks on me after everything I had been through. But deep down, I knew better. It wasn't over. Not even close. The mark of the shadow. By the time I reached my apartment, exhaustion had settled into my bones. I locked the door behind me, my fingers trembling. My body felt wrong, like something had been left behind in that house. Or worse, like something had followed me home. I stepped into the bathroom, flicking on the light. The fluorescent glow buzzed above, casting sharp shadows against the walls. I turned to the mirror and froze. A dark mark spread across my collarbone, curling toward my throat. It looked like veins, black, branching, unnatural. I touched it. It burned. A gasp left my lips, and I stumbled backward, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The whisper came then, soft, right against my ear. "You let me out." I spun around. No one was there. The past never dies. I grabbed my phone and scrolled frantically through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Mrs. Holloway. She was the one who had given me the doll. She had known something. She had warned me about it. Maybe she had answers. I pressed call. The phone rang, and rang, and rang. Just as I was about to hang up, the line clicked. But no one spoke. "Mrs. Holloway?" I whispered. A faint breath crackled through the speaker. Then, it's too late. The line went dead. Nowhere is safe. A chill crawled down my spine. I stood in the silence of my apartment, gripping the phone like a lifeline. The lights flickered. A soft creak echoed from the hallway. I turned, every muscle in my body going rigid. The apartment was empty, but the darkness in the hallway wasn't normal. It was thick, pressing against the walls like a living thing, moving. I took a step back. The whisper came again, this time from everywhere at once. "Now you belong to me." The shadows in the hallway surged forward, running from the unseen. I didn't think. I just ran. I tore through the apartment, shoving furniture behind me, knowing it wouldn't stop whatever this was, but needing to do something. My heart pounded as I fumbled with the front door lock, my hands slick with sweat. Behind me, the shadows crawled across the walls. Something was coming. Something was reaching for me. I yanked the door open and sprinted into the stairwell, not daring to look back. Down the steps, out into the cold night, into my car. I locked the doors, my breath ragged, my hands shaking as I turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered, then died. The face in the glass. Silence. The streetlights hummed faintly outside, casting long shadows against the pavement. I gripped the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. Then, in the rearview mirror, a reflection that wasn't mine. A face. Pale, featureless. A smooth void where I should have been. A voice cold, hollow inside my head. There's nowhere left to run. The shadows poured into the car. The world outside the car blurred into nothingness. The streetlights flickered wildly as if reality itself was breaking apart. My breath came in shallow, ragged gasps, my fingers frozen against the steering wheel. The whisper, asterisk, asterisk, that horrible, slithering whisper, asterisk, asterisk, curled around me, thick and suffocating. There's nowhere left to run. The shadows in the car twisted and coiled like living tendrils, slithering across the dashboard, creeping toward my arms. I slammed my hand against the door handle, yanking it open with a strength fueled by pure desperation. I threw myself out of the car, hitting the pavement hard, pain shooting through my knees and palms. But I didn't stop. I scrambled to my feet and ran. The streets were empty. The houses, silent. Even the wind had died, leaving behind a vacuum of stillness. But I knew I wasn't alone. Something was chasing me. I didn't dare look back. A city that isn't real. I ran blindly, my lungs burning, my heart hammering against my ribs. The city should have been alive with sound, cars, distant sirens, the hum of late-night life. But it wasn't. It felt wrong. Every street I turned onto looked the same. The same cracked pavement. The same flickering lights. I turned onto a street I knew should have led to the main road. Instead, I found myself back where I started. I was running in circles. Or worse, the city was shifting around me. The shadows pooled at the edges of the buildings, watching, waiting. A whisper slithered through the empty air. "You can't leave." I staggered to a halt, panting. Then I saw her. A little girl, standing under a broken street lamp. Her small hands clutched something to her chest. A doll. The same doll. The cursed, whispering doll I had tried to destroy. The girl with hollow eyes. She lifted her head. Her eyes, black, empty voids. She smiled. "You broke her." So she needed a new home. A shiver ran through me. She took a step forward. I took a step back. The streetlight above her buzzed violently, the glow stuttering. Her shadow stretched toward me, growing longer, darker. Reaching. I turned and ran again, my legs screaming in protest. My mind was unraveling, struggling to grasp what was happening. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But the whispers behind me were real. The weight of something unseen closing in was real. And the overwhelming certainty that I was never going to escape was very, very real. The place between reality and nightmare. I stumbled into an alleyway, my breath hitching in my throat. My hands pressed against the cold brick wall as I tried to steady myself. Darkness stretched ahead. I turned and froze. The girl stood at the entrance of the alley. Only, it wasn't a girl anymore. Her body twitched and spasmed, her head tilting too far to one side, her mouth stretching open too wide. The doll was inside her chest. Its porcelain face peeked through her ribs, its painted lips moving, whispering. "Stay with me." A scream clawed up my throat, but I swallowed it down and ran deeper into the alley. The walls closed in. The shadows grew thicker. And suddenly, I wasn't in the city anymore. The house of endless whispers. I staggered forward, my footsteps echoing in the suffocating silence. The alley had vanished. In its place stood the house. The same house where it all began. Impossible. But it was there. The rotting wood, the broken windows, the air thick with something old and foul. A chill slithered down my spine. The door creaked open, and the whisper came again. "Come home." I wanted to run. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run. But my legs wouldn't move. Some invisible force pulled me forward. My breath came in short, panicked bursts as I stepped inside. The walls pulsed like something alive. The wallpaper crawled with shifting shapes, black tendrils slithering along the ceiling. The house was breathing, and the doll's voice was everywhere. "You let me out." But I was never meant to leave. The truth I wasn't ready for. I stepped into the living room, my body trembling. And there, in the center of the room, sat a small wooden chair. The doll rested on it, its lifeless eyes staring straight at me. My heart pounded against my ribs. Slowly, its head turned. The whisper curled into my ears like smoke. "I don't want to be alone anymore." The shadows around me rippled, shifted. I turned and saw them. Figures, hidden in the dark. Watching, waiting, all of them bound to this place. To her. Trapped souls. I stumbled back, my pulse thundering. And then I understood. I had never escaped. The moment I touched that doll, I had sealed my fate. There was no running. No hiding. No escape. A final whisper in the dark. The doll's porcelain lips moved. And I knew. She was choosing me. The others had failed. They had tried to fight. They had tried to leave. And now, they were part of the house. The air grew colder. The shadows closed in. The last thing I heard before everything went dark. "You're mine now." Darkness. It wrapped around me like a second skin, pressing into my lungs, my bones, my very soul. I couldn't see, couldn't breathe. The whispering was everywhere, inside me, outside me, all around. You belong to me now. The doll's voice slithered through my mind, soft and sickly sweet, like a lullaby from something ancient and hungry. I tried to scream, but my voice was gone. Then lit. A single, flickering light bulb sputtered to life above me. I was back in the house, but something was different. The air was heavier, thicker, as if the walls themselves were alive, breathing, pulsing. And then I saw them. Figures stood in the shadows, motionless. Men, women, even children. Their faces were blurred, their eyes hollow. They weren't alive. They weren't dead. They were trapped. And I was about to become one of them. A room without doors. I turned in frantic circles, searching for a way out, but there were no doors, no windows, only the whispering. It crawled under my skin, into my ears, my veins. Then from the darkness, a shape moved. The doll. It stood on its own now, its tiny porcelain feet tapping against the wooden floor. You wanted to leave me. It tilted its head. But I never wanted to leave you. I pressed myself against the wall, my pulse pounding so hard I thought my ribs might crack. The doll took a step closer, then another. And with each step, the room changed. The wallpaper peeled away, revealing something writhing underneath. The floor sagged, soft as flesh. The air reeked of rot, of old things forgotten in the dark. I was standing in a mouth. The entire room, a living, breathing thing. And I was about to be swallowed whole. The last chance to escape. I squeezed my eyes shut, forcing my mind to stay sharp. There had to be a way out. The others had been taken because they gave in. Because they let the whispers win. But what if I didn't? What if I fought? I forced myself to remember. Every horror, every moment the doll had tormented me. But I also remembered something else. The fire. Fire had hurt it before. Maybe it could again. I reached into my pocket, praying it was still there. My lighter. My fingers closed around it. The doll let out a sharp, unnatural gasp. It knew. I flicked the lighter on. A tiny flame, but in the swallowing dark, it was blinding. The shadows recoiled. The whispers screamed. The doll staggered backward. And the walls, they began to bleed, burning the curse away. I didn't hesitate. I lunged forward and grabbed the doll. Its porcelain skin was ice cold beneath my fingers, but it squirmed like something alive. It fought me, its whispers turning to shrieks. I shoved the flame against it. The moment the fire touched its dress, it caught instantly. The doll wailed. The sound wasn't human. It was something older, something evil. The room shook violently. The walls cracked, splitting open like old wounds. The figures in the shadows began to move. They turned to me, their hollow eyes suddenly filled with light. They weren't whispering anymore. They were crying. Thank you. The words weren't spoken, but I felt them, a rush of relief, of finality. And then, everything collapsed, waking up to silence. I gasped as my eyes snapped open. I was lying on my back, staring up at the night sky, cold pavement pressed against my spine. The house was gone. No ruins. No ashes. Just an empty lot. As if it had never existed. I sat up, my body aching, my mind spinning. I was alive. Somehow I was alive. I pulled my lighter from my pocket, staring at the small, flickering flame. Then I turned and walked away, never looking back. But some whispers never fade. Days passed. I tried to forget. Tried to push it all down, convince myself it was over. And for a while, it seemed to be. Until one night I heard it. Soft. Distant. A whisper. And I knew. The doll was gone. But the curse? The curse never really dies.